Right, now let's bring in the panel and talk about some of the stories making news. On the panel tonight, distinguished journalist Rebecca Weiser, currently editing the Spectator Australia while our own Rowan Dean takes a well-earned break, and James McPherson, who, as it happens, writes for the Spectator Australia, and declaration of interest, so do I. Let's begin, Rebecca, with you. America has been hit by a bomb cyclone buried in snow, and there's been this astonishing story of footage actually, of people laughing at a corpse, someone who's died from the cold in the snow. Now, we as Australians think no one could ever do that. It is just an amazing story, an amazing footage, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't seen the footage. I think the platforms decided it was too cruel and too shocking to show. But it is horrific. It's sort of like Lord of the Flies, as if one minute we're living in a civilised country and then the mask is torn off it, and you sort of see really just how low people can go.
Yes, yeah. And it's the sort of thing that for Australians we think, no, when it's tough we go together, we get together. It doesn't happen in this case.
No, not in that case. Although I must say over the last couple of years I felt a little disheartened, even here in Australia, that we've seen in the pandemic people were pitted against each other, dobbing each other in for whether they were wearing a mask or not, saying some and social media, we see people behaving terribly every day.
Social media is not the real world. Social media is not the real world. Just remember that. James, it's also been really bitterly cold in the UK.
Yes.
And they've opened up more than, I think it's 3,000 warm banks, nice little warm rooms that people who can't afford to warm their own homes can go and huddle in. I mean, what happens to a civilised country when it's reduced to that?
This is incredible, isn't it? People are going to the church to find warmth because they're freezing in their own homes. And the reason that people are freezing is global warming. Our governments worldwide have decided that the Earth is warming, that it's catastrophic, and that we immediately need to give up cheap, reliable, plentiful energy and switch to renewables without any ability to store that energy, spending billions of dollars rewiring our entire electricity grids. And so this is a disaster entirely of our own making. Whatever your view on global warming is, it doesn't seem like governments have done this with a plan for a smooth transition. It's just been, quick, we've got to do this immediately. I mean, the United Nations General Secretary recently told us we're on a highway to climate hell. And so governments have just made these ad hoc decisions that are leaving people in first world countries where we've got plenty of wealth, but we've got people shivering to death in their own homes.
So there's a price to pay for that kind of hysterical language.
Absolutely. And it's a crisis entirely of our own making.
Rebecca, staying in Britain, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was doing the picture opportunity that Prime Ministers do, serving a meal in a homeless shelter, and had a conversation with the homeless man. In fact, let's have a listen to what he had to say to the homeless man.
What do you have? Do you work in a business? Do you want some fruit?
No, I'm homeless. I'm actually a homeless person at the minute, but I'm interested in business.
So he's talking to a homeless man and saying, do you work in business? I mean, what's going on? Is this just Rishi Sunak who's too rich, or is it an indication of how many politicians are out of touch with real life?
I think he's going for gold in the out-of-touch elites category. I mean, Rishi Rich, the poor little rich guy, frankly needs to get back in touch with reality. Here's a homeless man in a homeless shelter. Well, what a surprise. And no, he's not looking to get a job in business. He's looking to get through Christmas without freezing to death on the streets of London.
And the man has to actually say to the Prime Minister, I am homeless, as if he hadn't quite worked out where he was. So, insensitive to an astonishing degree.
But there's a real problem when elites lose touch like this, because they devise the sort of policies that James has just been talking about, with the sort of consequences. So I think even though he didn't seem to do very well on the small talk, he does need to spend more time with ordinary people and realise how his policies and his government's policies are making them suffer.
Well, let's turn to a better story, a more cheerful sort of story, James. There's an Aussie dad and a tradie who saw his daughter's car being broken into in the early hours of the morning. He went dashing out in his underwear and rushed in to fight the thieves and so on. Now, here is what he had to say on the subject.
I was naked. I woke up, found a pair of underpants, threw them on. All I wanted to do is hold on to one so we could get the police here.
You've got to like a bloke like that, haven't you? Now, does he deserve a medal? Does he deserve a title, Captain Underpants? What do we do here?
Make him President of the Republic, Kel. This is the quintessential Aussie, and we love these people. It harkens back to the 1980s. Do you remember Hallproof had a famous commercial that said, one day you're going to get caught with your pants down?
Oh, yes. So you had to be ready for this.
So you had to be ready for this.
Yes,
so
yes.
The serious side of this, though, Kel, is that this is the second time this has happened. Just 2 weeks ago, in the same suburb on the Gold Coast, a similar circumstance happened. A guy in his undies tackling car thieves. We're all laughing about the undies, but of course it's disguising a more serious problem.
There is a crime issue.
Juvenile crime, yes.
Yep, indeed. Now, I've got to tell you, my crystal ball is in the workshop at the moment, so I can't see into the future. But with a new year about to burst onto us, what does the future hold? Rebecca, what do you think the biggest tests are going to be this year for Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton?
Well, I've also parked my crystal ball somewhere. I don't like pretending I can foresee the future because, of course, none of us can. But judging on what's already happened, it's pretty clear that Anthony Albanese is going to have a head-on collision with the cost of living. He's already encountered it in energy costs, and it's just going to keep on. And his solution is socialism. It's, well, I'll go in and tell those companies what prices
Control
they can
the market.
charge.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Well, I think he's also going to discover that what happens in socialism is nobody bothers to produce things if you don't actually allow the market to operate. So that's going to be, we're running for trouble there.
OK, well, James, let's talk about that reality bites sort of thing, because the energy policy of the Albanese government is sun plus wind plus batteries will run Australia, and it won't. So will, at some point, reality bite on that?
Well, we know it will because we're watching it happen in Europe, and we're a little bit behind Europe. But this is the amazing thing about the situation we're in. We can see the future. We don't need your crystal ball.
Right.
We can see it on our television screens, what's happening in Europe. And we're
in those countries, it's happening now.
We're enacting the exact same policies, hoping for a different result. So I think, as Rebecca said, there will be a collision with reality soon, and it's going to affect all of us.
Rebecca, looking overseas, I mean, we can't know what's going to happen in Ukraine, but does it seem likely to you that that war will be resolved? It's at a terrible pitch, with people without power, without water, still dying. So will it reach a resolution, do you think, this year?
Look, the first thing to say about war is nobody ever wins except for the arms dealers.
Yep.
Second, on the Ukraine war, it should never have happened. This is a war that happened because when Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, he demonstrated such incompetence and weakness that Putin thought it's going to be a cakewalk into Kiev. And it wasn't. It was a quagmire. Now, who will win? They're all obviously losing in different ways. They are impoverished, but really the West needs to show more resolve. Putin threatens and the West seems to tremble and say, oh, he might use his nuclear weapons. Our nuclear armaments are much greater and he should tremble at us. So, look, I don't think the West can afford to lose. Who knows where borders in Europe are redrawn every 50 years, if not more often, sooner or later. But we cannot afford to let him win. Yep. But let's see what happens.
And James, I mean, it does raise the other issue of what the Chinese are making of what's going on in Ukraine. And today we learned there are military manoeuvres over Taiwan. Yeah. So. And Xi keeps talking about this. He keeps saying it's going to happen during his presidency. So next 12 months, will China conquer Taiwan?
Well, we don't want China to do anything, Kel, until 2040, because that's when we'll have our submarines ready in the event that something... So if they could just hold off for another 18 years, then we'll be ready. It's unbelievable, isn't it? We're weakening our economy, doing nothing to prepare for events that are being well forecast in advance. We want to hope nothing happens next year because we're not prepared for it.
Well, in fact, there is some preparation going on. There was a lovely story today about new missile protection being provided for the top end of Australia with missiles mounted on the backs of utes. And I thought, on the backs of utes, that's an Australian solution, isn't it?
Driven by men in their undies. It's perfect.
Well, quite possibly by that. But we've seen the Ukraine war look like, Rebecca, a missile war. So we need to have a government which is very aware of where we need to be going in terms of weaponry and equipment, don't we?
Well, I just have to leap in there and say they weren't utes, they were bushmasters.
Oh, right.
And they are a great Aussie success story and are playing a role, have played a role, very successful role in Afghanistan and in the Ukraine when the mud forms, those bushmasters really come in and will come into their own again. But how do we know how all of this will pan out?
Oh, yes. But they've got to be spending the money now and getting organised now.
Correct.
Look, Rebecca Weiser and James McPherson, thank you very much indeed for your time.